Okay, there we go. So a little bit about what I'm going to go through today. I'm just going to go through a short background on management decisions that impact soil. Maybe you reiterate a little bit of what Doug talked about in the first episode with him and Kurt Schroeder on their presentation. And then I'm going to go through some of the agronomic and economic experiences that we've seen from our study here at the Wilke farm. And then I'm going to conclude talking about some of those next steps as we move forward. And the thing I look at with any of these soil acidity and pH issues and things like that, we're really accustomed in agriculture for quick fixes. How can I fix it now? And what do I need to apply to fix it and fix it? And sometimes it's not that easy. And this is a problem I think Doug alluded to that we've been developing for the last 70 years plus here in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of it comes down to fertilization and the soil acidification because of fertilization. So I'm just going to reiterate a couple of those factors that decrease soil pH. One of them is ammonium-based fertilizers, leaching of nitrogen. Even, there's some confusion a little bit. Even the end fixation from legumes will do some acidifying of the soil. And then finally, crop residue removal. When you remove straw, it's, I think Doug was talking about a number on nitrogen with ammonium fertilizer. For every pound you put on, it takes about 1.8 to 2 pounds of calcium carbonate to neutralize it. If you remove the straw, you bump that up and you can double it to almost 4 pounds. That's required. And just a little bit with the straw removal. When straws removes the ground, you're removing the calcium, magnesium, potassium, and these are all base cations. And then you also get some decrease of the soil organic matter. So when you look at what straw removal does to the soil and balancing out some of those economics, this piece definitely needs to be considered into the long-term economics of a scenario with straw removal. Leaching of nitrogen, and this is why the reason I'm going to conclude my presentation today, talking about some of those next steps, is based on this leaching of nitrogen, losing nitrogens, and what happens when it leaves. And it really, I think Clayton Jones on a Ag PhD segment with Clayton Jones, he mentions that when you lose nitrogen, it just grabs calcium on its way out the door. And that's why it helps create some of the acidity. So, what are we doing to improve nitrogen management and minimize the potential for leaching? And this is one I get asked an awful lot, almost every field day, every grower meeting we have regarding soil acidification is this, and what fertilizer source is most acidifying? I have 3 of them listed here. Kind of a question: UAN, urea, or anhydrous. Anyone know the answer to which one may be most acidifying? Anyway, you can, and at any time, please unmute and jump in and stop me if you have a question about anything I'm talking about at any time. That's more than accepted. So any ideas which one may be the most acidifying right here? Doug, you mentioned it the other day. Do you remember which one was most acidifying of these 3?
We have a vote from the audience, and that vote is anhydrous. Is that correct? Tell us more.
They are equal. Fertilizers, for the most part, fertilizer is fertilizer, and if you're applying the same amount of nitrogen with each of these, the amount of acidification is fairly equal between the 3 of them. I know anhydrous, even I showed a picture of the anhydrous machine in my first slide, and it has a wrap for creating more, a lot of people feel it does more acidifying, but pound for pound of N, it's pretty equivalent to these other sources of nitrogen. And I really like the summary Doug provided the other day on the listing of fertilizers and how they acidify the soil. So this is just looking at a standard soil test. I'm sorry, Stephen Jones, but this one came from Soil Test Consultants, but I'm not picky. I use both labs a lot and they both do great jobs. Here we're looking at just a soil test and it has a soil pH of 5.9. The one thing to take note on is it's from the first foot. And this is very common from farmers across the region. When they pull soil samples, they get the pH across the first foot. And here we're looking at the field, I call it home site, the field, and it's 5.9. So getting down there a little bit, some of my other fields are 6, but 5.9, you know, I kind of gloss over that and keep moving. When I break it down though into a little bit different approach, into, you know, we've spent a lot of time talking about depth, and here we're looking at 0 to 3 inches, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12 inches. You know, you can see a lot of differences all of a sudden. 0 to 3 inches, we're at 5.5, 5.2 at 3 to 6 inches. And here at 6 to 12, we're right at 6.4. And I really want all my soil samples to come in between 6 and 7, you know, at least 6.5. So that's kind of my target on the farm. And you see we're well below it. And then I throw this number on top of it, and it's aluminum, the amount of exchangeable aluminum. And this one really opened my eyes. You can see the exchangeable aluminum, 0 to 3 inches, we're at 15 parts per million. 3.6 or 3 to 6 inches, we have 53 parts per million. When I start seeing exchangeable aluminum getting greater than 25 parts per million, is the piece I really start getting nervous. You know, I've always talked about aluminum or soil pH. It's kind of a gradual slope going down, and then all of a sudden you kind of fall off that cliff. And I think on this particular field, on this home site field, I think I'm starting to approach that cliff as we come through. And by the way, this is not the field I have my study in, but this is the field I'm going to consider putting my next study in the following year. And you see where we're at for parts per million here at 6 to 12. And ideally, I want to get across the farm, I want my exchangeable aluminum to be 2 parts per million or less. And it was interesting looking at some of Tim's work that he was just talking about, where he was showing a soil pH of 4.6, but he only had 5.6 parts of aluminum. And from my experience here at the WSU Wilke farm, which is located just at the eastern edge of Davenport in about a 13, 14-inch rainfall zone, my numbers tend to rise a little bit higher than what Tim was showing with aluminum, with exchangeable aluminum in relationship to pH. So a little bit about the study we have. The field I just was talking about, with where I may put the next study in, is at the home site, which is field 7 or field 8. The field I put the study in back in 2006 was field 3. It's in a 4-year rotation where we go fallow, winter wheat, broadleaf crop, and then a spring cereal for the most part. And I've kind of changed it since then. That spring cereal's been removed for a winter cereal. So a continuous winter wheat following the broadleaf crop. So that's just a little bit of what you'll be seeing going through. But we initiated this study in the fall of 2016. I talked about in 2016, we used that boom buster nozzle to apply the treatments. Since then, we've done 3 additional treatments, and we've used a spoke wheel applicator, trying to get that calcium deeper in the soil profile. Trying to get it down and in a couple inches. You can see these spikes over here. Hopefully my mouse is moving, and you see those spikes are about 3 inches, 4-inch spikes. So we're trying to put that liquid lime down into the profile a little bit more and remove the disc for incorporation. And when I talk about liming, that just the logistics of it is some of the stuff that makes it a little bit difficult. So this is what the study looks like. You can see it's a large study, 500 feet long. Each plot's 45 feet wide. And we have not applied lime or we have applied lime. And you can see the amounts of lime we've been applying here. In 2016, we applied 96 gallons to start with. 2018, we applied another 96 gallons, and that's given us about 1,150 pounds of calcium carbonate. And you can see the different rates and applications we've had since 16, 18, 21, and then another 46 gallons in 22. And overall total now for this field on the study, we have a total of 334 gallons an acre. 4,000 pounds of calcium carbonate applied, or 1,600 pounds of pure calcium. And then you can see the different crops that we've had on the ground. 2017, we started with chickpeas. So when I talk about the chickpea yield, it only received this 96 gallons or 1,150 pounds of calcium carbonate. Same thing with the DNS wheat in 18. We harvested it. That calcium carbonate application in 18 happened after harvest. So then we go to no-till fallow, then we go to winter wheat. So that had those two applications. And then we applied more lime prior to seeding the spring canola in 2021. I have a star on the canola here in 2021. It was one of those crops I really wanted to see what happened on this piece of ground. However, we had significant frost damage on that crop, and we were unable to harvest it. So I have no yield data from 2021. And then we have our winter wheat crop in 2022, go no-till fallow in 23, and then we currently have winter wheat seeded on this field today. So when I talk about the yields, this is a little bit of what we're seeing in relationship to the lime. And I really do need to thank the Columbia River Carbonate Group for all their help and support on this trial. They've been fantastic to work with on anything I've asked, and their help and support and expertise has been greatly appreciated. So when I go back and look at these plots, I soil sample them every spring prior to seeding. I don't soil sample historically if I have a growing crop on them. Like this spring where there's winter wheat, I will not soil sample it. But we do a composite sample. We collect five locations within each plot, and we use 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12 inches. And from that, we get soil pH and extractable aluminum. And this last year, I actually got all the nutrients, which I'm going to talk about later on. The trial is seeded with our commercial no-till disc drill. We have a John Deere 750, and we do variable rate across the field with nitrogen. And the trial itself is treated just like the rest of the field. So if there's a green zone within this study, it gets the green rate. If there's a red zone within this study, it gets the red zone of fertilizer. So nothing else in this study is treated any differently except for lime application. Varieties, no difference in varieties from the rest of the field. And same thing with all the fertilizer is doing like we do commercially across the farm. We harvest the trial with our commercial combine, a John Deere 9500. And we collect all the grain samples, quality, and things like this. And the last year, we also collected grain samples for nutrient analysis. I'll talk a little bit about that as well, trying to help untangle some of these interactions we've been seeing here with these soil pH studies. So a little bit on the history here. What it looked like in 2017. So we applied the treatment in 2016. We're getting ready to seed that first chickpea crop in 2017. And this is what the results look like. You can see 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12. And where the blue line represents the check. The red line represents where we applied the calcium. And you can see we've done significantly increased the soil pH here in the 0 to 3 inches. But we have nothing happening in the 3 to 6 and 6 to 12 inches. And see the average. That's what it looks like in 2017. this is what it looks like this spring in 2023. So you can see very similar to what Tim was talking about. We've seen almost all this activity, all this change happening here in the 0 to 3 inches. We still haven't had much activity in 3 to 6 inches, and then 6 to 12. So you can see where we're at. The pH is now close to 6.4, where we've been applying the calcium. Even using that spoke wheel applicator and putting the lime maybe a little bit further down in the profile, we still really haven't moved it out of that 3 inches and down into that 3 to 6 inches like we're hoping to be able to do with that spoke wheel applicator. And when that thing rolls across the ground, it goes down about 3 to 4 inches, depending on how hard the ground is at the time. And it really takes all that lime and distributes it from the bottom up to about the soil surface. You can actually see some lime still laying on the soil surface from using that tool to apply lime. And then we look at the exchangeable aluminum here. Where the first time I sampled it in 2019, and then what it looks like in 2023. And once again, this is interesting. Even in 2019, it showed up. We see some differences here where we're looking for lower numbers. We have significantly less aluminum is 0 to 3 inches, even back in 19. And we really have a big difference. We didn't see that difference in pH at the 3 to 6 inch, but the exchangeable aluminum showed up instantly here, significantly less exchangeable aluminum at that 3 to 6 inches. So I'm interested to see when Tim looks into his data a little bit further if he has seen any of this as well. Once again, no pH change, but we are seeing less aluminum in that 3 to 6 inches. And even today with those subsequent applications, you can see where we're at. It really hasn't changed much from 2019 through 2023. And where we're at in some instances, our check has been coming up a little bit or been holding steady. And once again, I have highlighted here, I want my exchangeable aluminum, kind of my target is I want the exchangeable aluminum 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 12 inches. I want it less than 2. So I'm keep evaluating whether or not if I need to make a separate application again as we move forward. The next time I check my soil pH will really help determine if I want to make a second another application at this location, at this site. So now let's look at yield. The first year, the chickpeas in 2017, you could walk across that chickpea field and it was easy to pick out all 5 replications where we applied the calcium carbonate. It was, I'm not going to say extremely striking, but it was just walking across it. You could quickly tell which treatment was which. And we did have a significant increase in our yield. It 1,162 pounds versus 1,039 pounds an acre. But then we'll look at the subsequent yields of wheat. DNS, we have a trend for higher yield, 48 bushel versus 46. However, it wasn't significant. In 2020, we had winter wheat on that field. The calcium treatment went 106, the check went 102. Getting close to being significant, but not quite significant there as well. And then this last year, we had that continuous winter wheat, and we looked at 66 versus 65 bushel. And overall, you add up all those yields and do all the stats. Over the 4 harvests, we still don't have a significant difference in our grain yield where we've applied the calcium versus where we have not applied the calcium. We saw, like I said, I was talking about the chickpeas. We did see a 12% increase there. And when I go back and looked at this, I've even asking our first presenter, Joaquin, about this on varieties. I went back and looked at what varieties I'm selecting. And you can see for the first year, the dark northern spring wheat, I used alum, which is tolerant to aluminum toxicity. No significant difference. In 2020, where I used Piranha CL Plus winter wheat, it's moderately tolerant to sensitive. And when you look at the ratings, these are coming from the WSU variety testing program and all the numbers that they're generating. And they really rank all varieties on 4. Either it's tolerant, moderately tolerant, or moderately tolerant, sensitive, or it's sensitive. So you can see the ratings I have on these varieties. In 2022, the variety I picked was Sockeye, and it's moderately tolerant. So it's second line for its tolerance. You know, and if I would have used the sensitive variety on this study on all 3 years, maybe I would have a significant, bigger difference. I would suspect I would have a bigger difference in my yields, and it probably would be significant. So that's when we're looking at this and trying to figure out this whole scheme of what we need to do if we're going to use the NDVI imagery, and we want to look at it on wheat, maybe Sockeye or Alum wouldn't be our best variety. We may want to pick one that's has a ranking of S or sensitive to give us a better idea of what our soil pH looks like across the field, and maybe a better rating to give us more estimates of accurate site-specific applications of lime in the future. And we talked about doing economics. I don't have a lot of economics on this. I don't, at this point, my background is in ag economics with a plant science master. So I really like where economics meets plant science. I don't need my degree on this at this time. Over these 4 crops, the total lime cost has probably been close to $726 an acre, give or take $100 or $200 or $400 an acre on that. My overall increase in revenue over these 4 crops has been $69 an acre. So the return on investment is still not there. With the soil pH and the levels that we're seeing here on this farm. But once again, I don't want to get to where my aluminum toxicity is reaching that 100 parts per million or 400, like some of the stuff Tim was showing. Okay, now we're looking at, we've seen this chart hundreds of times on nutrient availability. And as we get more acidic, some minerals become less available, some of them become more available, and vice versa. Okay, so this is, I want everyone to take a really close look at this and memorize some of the stuff. It's not too bad, but we have it broke down. I'll break it down here a little bit. The first top line up here is 0 to 3 inches, 3 to 6 inches, and 6 to 12 inches. We're looking at a complete soil sample of 0 to 3 inches, 3 to 6 inches, and 6 to 12. So we're looking at boron and nickel and potassium and cation exchange and the breakdowns there and everything else, and even lime requirements. The thing, I did the stats on it in these small lines that no one can really see unless you're looking really, really close with cheaters on. But the thing to note, I highlighted all those that were significantly different. I have no significant difference in nutrients in 6 to 12 inches. Looking at my numbers, I would absolutely expect that. 3 to 6 inches, I have very little significant difference in any of the nutrients, except for a couple that I may anticipate. One of them is B and phosphorus, both on the Olson and the braid test here. We have a significant differences here in phosphorus. But up here in the 0 to 3 inches, we have a lot more red, whether it's bulk density, significant difference in bulk density, in phosphorus, in boron, magnesium, copper, iron, and so on, even down here to our ratios and stuff. We do have significant differences there as well. A lot of numbers, but I'm going to break it down a little bit differently for you here. This comes back to the chart with nutrient availability. And here's our current level. This red line represents our current level where we've applied the calcium carbonate. And this is where our soil pH is at in our check. And right here, no difference in nitrogen. We have more phosphorus in our check than we do in our calcium, where we applied calcium. No difference in potassium, no difference in sulfur. We do have a difference here in calcium, which you'd expect. 9 parts per million versus 7. Magnesium, no difference. Iron, we have more iron in our check. Magnesium, we have more magnesium in our where we've applied the calcium carbonate. Boron, we have more where we've applied. And then copper, we actually have more copper down here in our check than what we do in our where we've applied the calcium carbonate. And it kind of goes a little bit back and forth with what's available. But there's one here that really made me scratch my head, and I can't figure out. I think, just generally looking at it, I think these numbers should have been flip-flopped. Less phosphorus available as the soil pH goes down, right? That's what you'd expect. But in this case, I have more. When I come and look at nutrient removal, this is taking grain samples, sending them to best test, and getting the nutrient removal on it. And not a lot of differences looking at all these, except for phosphorus and magnesium. Here on the phosphorus, we have significantly more phosphorus uptaken in the grain where we've applied the calcium carbonate compared to where we have not applied the calcium carbonate. It may not look like a lot, but overall there's significantly more phosphorus in the calcium carbonate, and it equals about 1 pound of P2O5 is what that calculates out to. So as the soil pH gets less, our phosphorus uptake is less in the plant. Is a little bit of what I'm showing. And when I look at across the farm where I'm not seeing the phosphorus uptake levels like I think, some of it comes down to this right here. So quick overview, the trial was established in 2016. We've applied 4,000 pounds of calcium carbonate, 1,600 pounds of pure calcium. We've seen significant differences in that 0 to 3 inch, and then at 3 to 6 inches with exchangeable aluminum. The wheat yields are trending higher, but no significant difference. Where we've applied the calcium carbonate, the chickpeas, we did see an increase. We've had no positive returns on our investment, but I've heard that this is a long-term investment. We'll keep it going and keep those numbers moving through and see what happens. And then looking here, soil nutrient availability can be detected within that top 3 inches. And we're looking mainly focused on phosphorus. We see differences in calcium, magnesium, iron, magnesium, boron, copper, but really phosphorus is the one I'm interested in, and looking at some of the differences as we move across the farm. So any questions about that study before I move on to some of the next steps?
Yeah, we got a couple questions for you.
Yeah.
Going backwards from most recent, would you consider adding micronutrients into your research going forward?
The question is, would I consider adding micronutrients moving forward? That's one of the reasons, Doug, I started by just collecting some of those basic data on nutrient removals to even see what we want to do with that moving forward. One of the reasons these trials are bigger is we have an opportunity to run. I know Mike Pumphrey's been using this study for the last 2 years to do some of his selections and stuff. And studies like that, I'm never going to say no to.
Okay.
I just didn't have enough data to figure out which ones I wanted to look at. And been going the opposite and just looking at soil sampling and nutrient removal to get to some of those questions.
Next question being about the yield differences you observed. In the spring wheat end of your rotation, you had alum. Where I've seen alum succeed is in areas that it's bred for, areas that have a soluble aluminum pressure, downward pressure on yield because of aluminum toxicity. But where it is grown in trials where that pressure doesn't exist, I never see it as the top yielding variety. So I'm wondering how much of your yields the differences or lack of differences you observed was because you were selecting varieties for the without that top yield potential in mind, because it's not usually what would succeed there.
That's interesting, Doug. One of the reasons I selected alum wasn't because of the aluminum toxicity, is when I look at how it has done, especially back in 2017, in relationship to the other hard red or dark and spring wheat varieties we had available, it's in that top group in
Okay.
in this zone, in this area.
Okay.
It wasn't specifically picked out for the aluminum tolerance.
Some other adaptive characteristics that are beneficial.
Yeah.
Okay. Carol asked if she wondered if the yield differences would have been more pronounced had you seen, had your checks, but had you had a lower pH to begin with, or more aluminum, or because you're talking about 15 parts per million, that doesn't scare me too much when you compare that to 50 or anything beyond that.
No, and at the time we put the study in back in 2016, I had a couple fields I was looking to put it in. I don't remember which ones. And this one had some of the lower, I didn't have exchangeable aluminum at the time. I was just looking at soil pH at 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 12. And this one was the best candidate for it, because a lot of growers across the region were interested. I wasn't sure if our pH numbers were going to be low enough to meet some of these differences, but I think over time, I want to see what happens when I can get that ground, everything at neutral 6 to 7, and then, versus where we're running without calcium, and see what happens over time. Because I've heard people mention, I think Paul Carter's mentioned many times, that this isn't a short-term fix. We're looking for long-term solutions. And so I'm going to carry this thing out and continue looking at these and offer it up for any additional research as we move forward. And I want to bring that home site piece, which I think will give us better numbers as far as yield and return on investment. It's one I've been scratching my head because we haven't gotten very good yields off of it. And there's some reasons for that, I think.
It looks quite different than the research I've seen coming out of Dr. Schroeder's experiments, but he may be working in areas, well, we'll find out where he's been working in January 18th.
Yeah, he's been in a lot more acidic zones than I get to play in.
Shall we continue?
Yeah. Okay, so I talked about next steps. Is this piece of the home site is one I'm trying to figure out to bring in a trial. I want to put the treatments down next fall. I got a lot of groundwork I still need to get done as far as figuring out rates and applications, and talk with Dr. Murray about fly ash or biochar as an amendment as well, and what those treatments may look like. Talked about all that, and this number here just kind of really jumped out and scared me, that 52 parts per million. Nitrogen, when I look at it, it's a huge driver of our soil health. We spent a lot of time talking about soil health and the microbiology of the soil and everything else, but it really comes down to how do we manage our nitrogen, and that's really one of the biggest drivers here is soil health. One of the things I want to conclude with talking about briefly today is looking at nitrogen use efficiency. And when I look at it, this is a number, I call it's my report card for how I did for the year. What did I do this year, and what will it mean for next year? This particular number, nitrogen uptake efficiency or use efficiency, is really easy to calculate. Growers ask me all the time about the need for nitrogen stabilizers. Do I need to split apply or this or that? I can't answer that question without a number, without data behind it. And this is one of the things I'd like to see farmers look at more to make some of these changes. Even, do they need to invest in site-specific nitrogen application? If you're if you're happy with your nitrogen use efficiency, keep doing what you're doing. If you're not getting the nitrogen use efficiency you're looking for, then let's figure out what we need to do to change it. And these are three of the potential things we could do to change it. And then with maps, I work with a lot of farmers on maps and how to design a nitrogen application map. And are they correct, or when do you need to change them? I want to know what my nitrogen use efficiency is to know if I got a good map, a bad map, or if it's time to adjust my map, or if I can keep using that map. If you go to the Small Grains website, smallgrains.wsu.edu, you'll come up with the page that looks like this. If you click on soil and water resources, you get into tools and calculators, and from there you can get into this post-harvest nitrogen use efficiency calculator. I'd really like a lot more wheat producers utilizing this to make some of these big decisions with. Just going through, the first piece you have is this. It's just where you input your data. And you really need those 4 pieces of data. You need your yield, your protein, net soil supply, either your soil sample or your number coming from that nitrogen calculator that's highlighted up here. And I specifically put that on there because it looks at your available nitrogen a little differently than what you're just going to get from off your soil sample. How it handles previous crop residues, and it looks a little bit differently at organic matter. So it handles some of that just a little bit differently. And then how much nitrogen you applied. And that's not just how much nitrogen you applied deep or with your main application, but how much nitrogen did you put on with the starter fertilizer? Did you put on with your herbicide applications? If you put any nitrogen or stuff in there, what's the total nitrogen? We're looking at field 6 this year at the Wilke farm. We harvested 73 bushel. Protein was 9.9. We had 185 pounds of nitrogen available, and we put 49 pounds of nitrogen on this crop total. So we enter our data. You can enter soft white winter wheat crop. You have to enter that. And then up here, you enter as much data as you desire. And then you just come through and you hit calculate. And then it populates it with how much nutrient uptake and removal you have. Right here, so is your total nitrogen removal, how much was removed in the grain, and how much remained in the straw. How much P2O5 total removal, potassium, sulfur, and chloride. The one thing about chloride I found with this tool is it says that we're removing 0 in the grain. I don't think that's true. We are removing some chloride in the grain. So that one, you may have to take the chloride a little bit more with a grain of salt as I look at this a little bit more. And we probably should try to figure out how to get that fixed a little bit more, except the people who put this together no longer work for WSU. But down here, we get to the nitrogen uptake efficiency at 46.6. Ideally, I want to see that number at 50%. Pounds of nitrogen supplied per bushel, 3.2. Ideally, that number should be 2.7 or lower. So I probably over fertilize this field a little bit here. And then potential nitrogen left in the after harvest is 125 pounds. And they got 125 pounds by taking total nitrogen available plus applied nitrogen minus how much was removed. And they're using 109. But we know we didn't remove all of that. So the difference lies between 125 plus 33 pounds. Okay, I talked about this just being an easy number to make these decisions on. If your nitrogen uptake's not where you need it to be, what do we got to do to fix it? Okay, it's easy to calculate. And then what does it mean for this year and next year? You know, right here, the residual N, when I come out and soil sample this field in the spring, I'm going to have between 125 and 158 pounds of nitrogen in that field. So I'm going to be having a higher than average nitrogen supply than what I'm used to seeing. So what does that mean? This field is planned to go to canola. For a 1,750 pound canola crop, it's going to require about 160 pounds of nitrogen. So I'm pretty good right there. Soft white wheat, my average is about 50 bushel. That would require 135 pounds of nitrogen. So you can see where I'm at. I'm continuously watching the markets between soft white and dark northern spring wheat to see if dark northern spring wheat is going to be an option for this field. And for a 45 bushel crop, it's going to require 162 pounds of nitrogen. So when I look at it, it's a great field to put canola on. It's a great field to put Dr. on the spring wheat on. Probably not as good a field for soft white. And this is a field I wouldn't want to put peas or chickpeas on because of all the residual nitrogen I have on the field. That's just one way you can use this number, this tool, to help make these decisions. And now I'm looking at what I need for nitrogen here coming into the next year. And I can start putting together more accurate budgets based off of this data right here and what I need to do to change moving forward. We talked a little bit about maps and stuff, and this just looks at, I have these fields broken into zones: red zone, green zone, yellow zone. Yellow is the average, green's the highest yielding portions of the field, red is the lowest. Here's looking at my green zone. Going through, I have a protein monitor on my combine, so it tells me the protein in each of these zones and yield. So in the green zone, my yield was 95 bushel right here, 94.8 bushel. My protein was 9.891. I put on 14 gallons of fertilizer. In my zone it was 30, but I cut it with 50% water. So I got 14 gallons of fertilizer. That's 90% thiazole, 10% solution 32. Add those numbers in. My nitrogen use efficiency on this field in my green zone is 50%. So, okay, maybe we could do something better with that. Here's what it looks like in my yellow zone, though. I'm down to 40%. Yield was 72, almost 73 bushel, right at the field average, 9.8 for protein, and we put on 10 gallons of total fertilizer on this field, on that portion of the field. In my red zone, my nitrogen use efficiency is 39%. And the problem I have is I can't get my nitrogen, applied nitrogen, much lower than what we're putting down. My equipment will not run any lower than 12 gallons, and I refuse to shut it off because I'll end up with plugged openers. So I'm continually trying to work on this zone to get it in shape over time. But just one of the ways you can utilize this tool to help do some troubleshooting on nitrogen, which there's nothing that has a bigger impact on your bottom line than your nitrogen and your nitrogen management, as well as soil health. And this is kind of what one of the things I like to do on the fields. I keep track of it. I started with 153 pounds from soil samples back in 2020. We put canola in, we put 55 pounds on. We have 208 pounds available. We harvest that canola, 1,755 pounds. We hauled off 67 pounds of nitrogen. Every farmer can tell me how many pounds of nitrogen per acre they put on a field. I want you to tell me how many pounds of nitrogen you exported from the field. So we got a balance of 141. Soft white, we put 54 pounds of nitrogen, have 195. Only harvested 21 bushel, bad year. Removed 27 pounds of nitrogen. Soft white wheat, we gave it 49 pounds, 217 pounds total, and we removed 76 pounds of that crop. Coming in this spring, I'm going to be right there. I showed 125 to 150. This is saying I'm going to have 141 pounds available in my soil. And I can guarantee you when I go out and soil sample this year, it'll be very close to that number. And that's kind of like a checkbook and what I want people to keep track of to help troubleshoot these issues. I think is extremely important, and what it means for proper nitrogen management and what it means to mitigate some of the acidic soil conditions we have here in the PNW. Some of it doesn't do you any good to lime a field and correct it if you're not going to change the basis for what created that issue in the first place. So conclusions: decrease in soil pH and decisions around liming applications are still big decisions. The proper assessment is critical. At the WSU Wilke study established in 2016, wheat yields are trending higher, but not different. The calcium carbonates, but they're not significant. The chickpea yield was significantly better, and we haven't seen a positive return on our investment yet. Nitrogen application is a major contributor to decrease in soil pH, and calculated and utilizing nitrogen uptake efficiency numbers, I think is important to monitor and adjust fertilizer management over time. And I really think, one of my premises, if you don't monitor it, you can't manage it. And I think by monitoring, you can ask them those questions about split applications, nitrogen stabilizers, and application rates by using that number. That's pretty easy to get your hands on. And with that, I'm done. Willing to answer any questions or anything moving forward. Look forward to seeing everyone here in another month in Clarkston.